The night Dennis Calloway decided to stop pretending he was fine. He was sitting alone at a corner table in Harborview Grill, watching the door and wondering how long a man was supposed to wait before he admitted that no one was coming. His friend Pete had set this up. That was the part Dennis kept turning over in his mind as the minutes stretched past 7:15, then 7:20. Pete, who had known him for 31 years, who had stood beside him at Claire's funeral 3 years ago, and said, "We'll get through this," who had apparently decided that getting through it meant sitting across from a stranger in a restaurant Dennis had never been to before, trying to remember how to talk about himself to someone who hadn't watched him fall apart. The hostess had seated him at a small table near the window. Outside, a light rain was coming down on the Milwaukee street, streaking the glass, blurring the headlights of passing cars into something almost soft. Dennis watched the water run down the pane and thought about how Claire used to love the rain. She would open the windows in the kitchen just to hear it. He ordered water, then he ordered coffee. Then he looked at his phone and found no messages, and he set it face down on the table and looked at the door again. A woman came in at 7:18, wearing a yellow raincoat and shaking water from her umbrella, and Dennis's chest did something complicated before he realized she was meeting someone already at the bar. He looked back at the window. He was 53 years old, sitting alone in a restaurant on a Tuesday in March, and the woman his best friend had described as exactly your type, Dennis, I promise, was now 19 minutes late. He thought about leaving. He thought about it the way a man thinks about jumping into cold water, not seriously, but as a way of measuring how much he didn't want to be where he was. He stayed, because Pete had asked him to, and because Claire had told him near the end that he was not allowed to become one of those men who stopped trying. He hadn't believed her when she said it. He believed her now. At 7:26, a woman walked through the door of Harborview Grill and stopped just inside the entrance, scanning the room with the focused, slightly breathless look of someone who had been running. Her dark hair was damp at the edges. She was wearing a navy blazer over a gray sweater, and she was carrying her coat instead of wearing it, which meant she had been moving fast enough that putting it on hadn't seemed worth the time. Her eyes found Dennis. She walked directly to his table. "You're Dennis," she said, "not a question." "I am," he said. She sat down across from him, set her coat over the back of her chair, and pressed both hands flat on the table as if steadying herself. "I am so sorry," she said. "I know how this looks. I was here. I was actually here at 7 o'clock and I was about to come over, and then I got a phone call from the school, and I had to go outside to take it. And then there was an accident on Jefferson. A car had gone up on the curb, there was a woman in the street and nobody was stopping, and I couldn't just—" She stopped, took a breath. "I am sorry. I know that's a lot to put on a stranger in the first 30 seconds. Dennis looked at her for a moment. "Is the woman okay?" he said. She blinked. "What? The woman from the accident? Oh!" She let out a breath. Yes. She was shaken up, but she was walking. I stayed until the ambulance came." "Good," Dennis said. He picked up his menu and held it out to her. "Do you want to start with something to drink?" Her name was Frances Alderman. She was 51, a high school history teacher, and she had been widowed 4 years ago when her husband David had a heart attack at their kitchen table on a Sunday morning while their daughter Nora was home from college for the weekend. Frances had told Dennis this not because she was dwelling on it, but because she believed she said in getting the hard facts on the table early so they didn't have to keep working around them all night. Dennis appreciated that. He told her so. "Pete said you lost your wife," she said. 3 years ago in February, he said. "Claire, ovarian cancer." Frances nodded, not with pity, which was what he usually got, but with the particular quiet acknowledgement of someone who understood exactly the weight of that sentence. "February is a brutal month to lose someone," she said. "Any month is," he said. "Yes," she agreed, "but February especially." He didn't know why that made him feel better. It just did. They stayed at the table past 8:30, then past 9. The restaurant filled up and quieted down again around them. Dennis told her about his son Aaron, who was 24 and working in Seattle for a tech company he didn't entirely understand, and about his daughter Meg, who was 21 and finishing her last semester at UW-Madison, and called him every Sunday morning without fail, which was the thing in his life he was most grateful for. Frances told him about Nora, who was 26 now and teaching kindergarten in Cincinnati, and about her younger sister Bea, who was 22 and finishing nursing school in Milwaukee and living 40 minutes away, which meant Francis was the person Bea called when anything went wrong. "Does anything go wrong often?" Dennis asked. "Often enough," Francis said, and her voice had something careful in it, not unhappy, just the voice of someone who had arranged her life around being reliable for other people. Dennis recognized the sound. He used it himself. She asked him what he did. He told her he ran a small manufacturing business his father had started in 1974, that it made specialty components for industrial equipment, that it was not glamorous in any way, and he had never pretended otherwise. He said this with the particular flatness of a man who was comfortable with the plainness of what he had built. Francis looked at him. "How many people work there?" she asked. "Right now, about 240. She studied him. "That's not small," she said. "It's small compared to what it could be," Dennis said. "We've had offers. I've said no." "Why?" He thought about it. "Because the people who work there have been there a long time," he said, "and the offers always come with plans that don't include them." Frances was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "David used to say that a business is just a collection of decisions about what you're willing to give up." "He was right," Dennis said. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street was wet and still, catching the orange light of the street lamps in the puddles, and the city had gone quiet the way it only did late on weeknights when the commuters had all gone home, and only the people with somewhere specific to be were still out. Dennis noticed sometime around 9:30 that he hadn't looked at his watch in over an hour. He noticed this because it was the first time in recent memory that had happened anywhere that wasn't his own living room or his office or Meg's apartment in Madison. He noticed it, and then he very deliberately didn't mention it. There was a moment near the end of their second cup of coffee when Frances was talking about a trip Nora was planning to Portugal, and she stopped mid-sentence and said, "I'm sorry. I've been talking for 10 minutes straight." "You have," Dennis said. "I noticed." She gave him a look. "I didn't say it was a problem," he said. The look shifted into something else, something that wasn't quite a smile but was in the same neighborhood. He walked her to her car. It was parked 3 blocks away on a side street, a 12-year-old Volvo with a cracked taillight she said she kept meaning to fix. The rain had left everything clean and cold, and their breath made small clouds in the air between them. She asked him if he was parked nearby. He said he'd taken a cab, which was true, and which she seemed to find mildly surprising. "You took a cab," she said. "I didn't know where I was parking," he said. "I looked at the map and it seemed complicated." "It's not complicated." "I know that now," Dennis said. She laughed. It was an unguarded laugh, the kind that happened before a person remembered they were being careful, and Dennis thought it was the best sound he had heard in longer than he wanted to think about. She unlocked the Volvo, turned back to face him. "I want to say something," she said, "and I don't want it to be weird." "Okay," Dennis said. "This was the first time I've done this," she said. "Since David. My sister set it up and I almost canceled 3 times this week." "I almost canceled twice," Dennis said. "Only twice? I don't have a sister," he said. "I had fewer people to talk me into it." She smiled at that, a real smile, slow and real. "I'm glad you didn't," she said. "Cancel, I mean. I'm glad you came back inside," Dennis said. She got in the car, rolled down the window. "Pete has my number," she said, "in case you didn't save it from when he gave it to you." "I saved it," Dennis said. She nodded once. Then she pulled out of the parking space and drove away down the wet street. And Dennis stood on the sidewalk in the cold Milwaukee night and watched her taillights, one bright, one cracked and dim, until they turned the corner and disappeared. He didn't call a cab right away. He stood there for a moment with his hands in his coat pockets, looking at the place where her car had been. He thought about Claire. He did this without guilt now, which had taken a long time to learn. Claire had been the kind of person who insisted on honesty at the expense of comfort, and he knew, with the particular certainty of 30 years of marriage, that she would have found the cracked taillight funny and would have liked the way Frances laughed before she remembered to be careful. She would have said something brisk and accurate about it. She would have told him not to stand there in the cold being sentimental. He took out his phone and called a cab. He texted Meg that night, "Just had dinner with a friend," which was both true and not the whole truth, and Meg texted back a single question mark 20 minutes later, because she had inherited Claire's instincts. He did not elaborate. He went to bed at 11 and lay in the dark and thought about the way Frances had pressed her hands flat on the table when she sat down, steadying herself, and about how he hadn't realized until just now that he'd recognized it because he did the same thing every morning when he sat down at his desk. He texted Frances on Thursday, not the day after. He had thought about texting the day after and decided it would be too fast, and then spent most of Wednesday second-guessing that decision. On Thursday he wrote, "The taillight on your passenger side is out. You should get it fixed before a cop notices." He looked at it for a while, then added, "Also, I'd like to see you again if you're open to it." She wrote back 14 minutes later, "I know about the taillight." And yes, they met for lunch that Saturday at a small Italian place Frances knew near the university. She was already there when he arrived at a corner table. Not because she'd been waiting long, she said, but because she liked corners. He told her he'd noticed that about her. She looked up from the menu. "Noticed what?" "At Harborview," he said. "You scanned the room from the door until you found the exits. You sat with your back to the wall." A pause. "You did the same thing," she said. "I know," he said. "I noticed that too." Over lunch she told him about David's family, who had complicated feelings about Frances moving forward, which was the phrase she used. Moving forward with the tone of a woman who had heard it said to her so many times that the words had gone smooth from handling. She said Nora was fine. She said Nora had in fact been the one to tell her she needed to stop using David's death as a reason to stay home. "She said that?" Dennis asked. "She said, 'Mom, Dad would have been on 3 dates by now.'" Frances picked up her water glass. She wasn't wrong. Dennis told her about Aaron, who had been harder. Aaron had gone quiet after Claire died, the way some people did, pulling inward and rerouting everything into work and distance. And for almost 2 years, Dennis had felt the shape of his son as an absence, physically present at holidays, emotionally somewhere very far away. They were closer now, not the way they'd been when Aaron was 12 and wanted Dennis to teach him everything, but something newer and more careful, built out of the specific understanding that they had both survived something they hadn't expected to survive. "Does he know you're doing this?" Frances asked. "He knows I'm trying," Dennis said. "I haven't told him about you specifically." "That's fair," she said. "I haven't told my mother-in-law specifically either." They looked at each other across the small table. "This is strange," Dennis said. "Completely strange," Frances agreed. "Are you okay with that?" "I'm working on it," he said. She nodded. "Me too," she said. There was a Sunday in April, 6 weeks later, when Meg came home for the weekend and Dennis made chili, and they watched 2 episodes of a documentary about national parks she'd been recommending since January. Halfway through the second episode, Meg said, without looking away from the screen, "Pete says you've been seeing someone." Dennis considered his options. "Pete talks too much," he said. "Pete is very excited," Meg said. "He keeps using the word great, like repeatedly." "She's great, Meg. She's really great." "She is," Dennis said. He said it without meaning to say it, and once it was out, he left it there. Meg was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'd like to meet her when you're ready, if that ever seems like a thing that makes sense." She said it carefully, the way she said everything important, and Dennis thought, not for the first time, that she was more like Claire than either of them had ever acknowledged out loud. "I'll tell her you said that," he said. "You don't have to tell her I said that," Meg said. "I know," Dennis said. "I'm going to anyway." He told Frances on their next Thursday. They had fallen into Thursday evenings almost without deciding to, the way some things become routine before they become deliberate. They were in his kitchen. She was standing at the counter reading the back of a tea box with the focused expression she brought to things that interested her. And Dennis told her what Meg had said, and Frances set down the tea box and was quiet for a moment. "She sounds like a good person," Frances said. "She is," Dennis said. "She's a lot like her mother." Frances looked at him then, directly, the way she looked at things she was deciding how to feel about. "Is that hard to say?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. "Less than it used to be," he said. "I think that's progress." Frances nodded slowly. "Bea wants to meet you," she said. "She asked me 3 times this week. I told her to wait until you were ready." "I'm ready," Dennis said. Frances looked at him. "Just like that?" "You've met the Thursday evening version of me 7 times now," he said. "She can't be worse than that." Frances smiled, that slow, real smile that still happened before she remembered to be careful. "You'd be surprised," she said. "Bea asks a lot of questions. So does Meg," Dennis said. They met both of them on a Saturday in May at a park near the lake. Bea showed up 15 minutes early and was already on a bench feeding crackers to a persistent pigeon when they arrived, and she stood up and shook Dennis's hand with the serious firmness of someone who had prepared for this. She was 22 and looked like Frances around the eyes, and she spent the first 10 minutes asking Dennis careful, thorough questions about his business that he suspected she had researched in advance. Meg arrived 12 minutes late with 2 coffees she'd picked up on the way and a calm, assessing look that Dennis recognized from Claire's face in photographs. She shook Frances's hand and said it was good to finally meet her and meant it, which Dennis could tell, because Meg was constitutionally incapable of meaning things she didn't mean. The 4 of them walked along the lakefront path for an hour. Bea and Meg fell into conversation about something. Nursing school, Madison, something about a podcast, and Dennis walked beside Frances and watched the lake, which was still in gray-green in the May light, and felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was something quieter than happiness, the sense that the shape of things was right. "Bea likes you," Frances said quietly. "How can you tell?" he asked. "She stopped asking questions," she said. "She only grills people she's unsure about." Behind them, Bea said something that made Meg laugh, a real, unguarded laugh, the kind Meg usually kept private, and Frances looked back over her shoulder at the 2 of them, and something moved through her face that was too complicated to name. "Nora is going to call you within 48 hours of me telling her about today," Frances said. "I'll be ready," Dennis said. She reached over and took his hand on the path, not asking permission, not making a production of it, just taking his hand the way people do when they've decided something, when the deciding is done and what's left is simply the doing of it. They walked that way for a while, the 4 of them strung out along the lakefront path in the cool May afternoon, the lake gray and still on one side, and the city present but quiet on the other. And Dennis thought about something Claire had said to him once. On a night he could no longer place, early in their marriage, for a reason he couldn't now remember. She had said that the best things in a life were almost never the things you planned. The things you planned turned out fine, she said, but the best things were the ones that arrived sideways, through a door you'd thought was just a wall. He thought he understood now, in a way he hadn't when she said it, what she had meant. He held Frances's hand and kept walking, and the lake went on being the lake, and the city went on being the city. And somewhere behind them, Bea was still talking and Meg was still laughing, and the afternoon light came through the trees the way it did in May, sharp and clean and too brief and entirely worth it.